Ahead this hour on Scripps News Tonight.
You're not campaigning.
Not campaigning. Does it look that way?
Well, it's New Hampshire. It certainly raises questions.
A call for common sense from a new political movement.
I'm telling you right now, it won't work. We're going to get on the ballot.
Tonight, Scripps News addresses claims of a broken system that could throw America's election process in disarray. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, former Republican Governor of Utah Jon Huntsman, face to face with New Hampshire voters. No question is off limits. Could a possible alternative for the 2024 presidential election be on the horizon?
I've never been in any race I've ever spoiled. I've been in races to win. And if I get in a race, I'm going to win.
Welcome to a special edition of Scripps News Tonight. I'm Christian Bryan in Washington. When it comes to politics, we typically think of Republicans and Democrats, but another group thinks that there might be room for one more. Over the weekend, the third-party group known as No Labels released a common sense booklet. The outline prioritizes bipartisan compromise over a lot of specific proposals to thread the needle between left and right on a variety of issues. For instance, the group says the annual budget should be reasonable and responsible, which means our national debt needs to stop growing faster than our economy. On guns, No Labels says Americans have a constitutional right to own guns, but society also has a responsibility to keep dangerous guns away from dangerous people. No Labels says it may field a Republican-Democratic unity ticket as an alternative, and the group is setting a deadline for activating what it calls an insurance policy for American voters next year.
If by Super Tuesday that we see the final two candidates, frankly, being Donald Trump or Joe Biden, if it doesn't change and we do get on the ballot access, which we will present a president and vice president candidate on a No Labels ticket. We plan to do that, but only if we see we have an opportunity to win.
Tonight, a No Labels town hall in the early primary state of New Hampshire featured Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia and former Republican Governor Jon Huntsman of Utah. Scripps News national political correspondent Kevin Cirilli moderated the event with questions from an audience of people supporting a potential No Labels White House bid. To be clear, there were no limits placed by No Labels on what questions we could present. And Scripps News has no affiliation with No Labels and doesn't endorse candidates or political movements. Our political director, Andrew Rafferty, joins from New Hampshire. Andrew, you're going to guide us through some of the key moments from this town hall. What did we hear tonight?
Yeah, well, good evening, Christian. That event wrapped just a short time ago behind me here at St. Anselm's in Manchester, New Hampshire. And a lot of Democrats, even some Republicans, watched this town hall with great anxiety, thinking that either of those two men you just mentioned, Joe Manchin or Jon Huntsman, today could be the day that they announce a third party or independent presidential run. Well, that didn't happen during this town hall, but they certainly didn't rule it out either.
I've never been in any race I've ever spoiled. I've been in races to win. And if I get in a race, I'm going to win. So, with that being said, I haven't made a decision, and I'm not going to I've never made a decision early. Let me say this to all of you. The only place in the world, in America, does the next election start the day after the last election. Doesn't happen anywhere else. But here, we expect to be in just a continuous cycle. That's not what the American people want. Give them a break. But they want to make sure you're going to answer the problems. And the problems you have right now, whether it's basically the border security. You've got to secure this border, but you have to have a pathway forward with work visas. We need workers in this country. You've got to fix the debt problem. We're not talking about debt. When's the last time you've heard anyone talk about the debt? 10 years ago, when he and I both started with No Labels, the debt was $14.79 trillion. It's $32.5 trillion today, and no one's saying a word. No one's saying a word, no matter what we do.
15 years.
Oh.
In the last 15 years, $21 trillion.
Yeah, we started out at 5.8 trillion in 2001. 5.8 trillion. We were on a downward trend, and it shot up like that. So if you want to blame Democrats, fine, we're all guilty. Blame Republicans, fine, we're all guilty. Everyone's guilty. They're not going to change their ways. And basically, if people make you believe you're divided, don't accept that. You're not divided. You wouldn't be sitting here if you were divided. It's the politics in Washington, the business of the Democrat and Republican Party that has a better model. Their business model is better if you're divided And basically they get you all chained up and you're ready to go, and nothing gets done. So their business model is better to be divided than united. And we're going to change that.
I want to get to the audience questions, but I do want to specifically highlight this because there are a lot of Americans who are independent voters, and they are concerned that if they were to vote for a unity ticket, that it would hurt President Biden and help President Trump. What do you say to those folks as they're considering this?
You just won't let this go, Kevin, will you?
Well, it's important, though.
This is the latest talking point. It's like the horse race. Forget about the issues, forget about the importance of expanding and enhancing our democracy. So you live in a place like China or Russia, and I've lived in both, running both U.S. embassies. They don't allow any choice. There's no participation. They're complete, pure authoritarian systems. So when I start hearing people here say, oh, well, that's not a good thing. You shouldn't do things to expand and enhance our participation in the system. It might result in A, B, or C winning or losing. I say, I've heard that before, but not in this country. Here, we do it differently. This is the most, this is the most innovative, creative, smart country in the world. Take it from somebody who's lived overseas multiple times. This is the most innovative, creative, smart country in the world. And the only element of American society that has not been transformed, every other industry has been transformed through innovation, new technology, whatever, is politics. It's still the same old, same old. I mean, if we end up in 2024 with the same set of nominees that we did 2020, I mean, is that insanity? Is that the definition of insanity or what? And that's why you've got, so what has changed from when we got together 12 years ago to today? Nobody cared 12 years ago. But in these intermediate years, there's been an implosion in trust toward our institutions and our leaders. People want more. So why is it that you've got 3/4 of the American people who say, if the outcome in 24 is same old, I think I'm going to want something different. So that brings us to today. So why is everybody here? For us, I mean, Joe, I understand, but you know, for the rest of us.
Kevin, let me just say this one thing.
There's interest in this concept.
What John's saying, most Americans still believe in the American promise. Most Americans still believe in the American promise, that you can be better and have a better life and better quality for your family, and they can do better than you've done. Most of them still believe that. I know they think it's a little bit harder now. What they don't believe in is the promises from the parties today. The political parties have not delivered. They're separating you further and further apart. So can you gain it if the political parties stay where they are today? Do you think you'll have a better life, or your families have a better opportunity or a better quality? Education's not where it needs to be. We can't compete. Basically, other countries have outperformed us in education. That's not acceptable. It's not acceptable.
So when you go, or Governor, put on your ambassador hat for a second, how do China and Russia specifically view the hyperpartisanship in the United States and what's happening here?
Oh, they love it. So if you were to look at their internal documents to say, what do they wish upon the people of the United States? The answer would be division. Pitting American against American. Taking away any sense of e pluribus unum. Nobody even recognizes or understands what e pluribus unum is today. Out of many, one. That's what our rallying cry has always been in this country. So yes, what they want to see in this country, other than a failure financially and a failure educationally, is for us to be divided and constantly at each other. Because if you could see what I have seen, living in Beijing and Moscow, when you look 10,000 miles away at this beautiful country and its beautiful people, when we are together on the big issues of the day, we shine and radiate, and we scare the hell out of China, Russia, and everybody else.
But Senator,
when we're divided, it's just the opposite.
But Senator, I mean, and all that sounds great, what he's saying. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, people will they've frequently looked at moderates and they see the mushy middle, or they say that the middle doesn't stand for anything, or if the middle has to cave to one of the sides. And so what is your response to the critics who say, this sounds like a great idea, but in practicality, it can't be executed?
Let me just, on the e pluribus unum, in West Virginia we have Montani semper liberi, mountaineers are always free. So you put out of many one and free on both of those and put them together, that's who we are. That's exactly what we want. We want this freedom that comes from us working together. So you're saying the mushy middle. Well, why would No Labels go to the effort to basically poll people around the country, thousands of people, input where they are to find out, are we just thinking about something that we would like to ideologically say this is where you are, or basically you tell us where you are? And I think that's what we've been able to share. Now, why do we act on that? You think that basically our finances are in good shape? No. What should you do? You want a balanced budget amendment? There could be things you could do. So many things. Debt financing. We put a piece of legislation out. We say it's going to cost X amount of dollars. Before they wait till you get hooked, you like what they're giving you, then they debt finance it for the rest. So I know all the tricks that have been played there. I've been there 13 years. It is time to speak up and basically make sure that we're held accountable and responsible. I can assure you, both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have benefited greatly by the dark money. And everybody's talking about dark money. They've greatly.
Well, they're also talking about whether or not, specifically with money, should groups like No Labels have to be transparent about where that money's coming from?
I would think the Democratic Party and Republican Party should be transparent. They got $1.7 billion in the 2020 election. $1.5 billion for the Republicans. That's over $3 billion of dark money nobody knows anything about. Nobody knows anything about. So I can tell you, if you want to change Citizens United, it can only happen in Washington. Both parties are going to have to pass a legislation that basically outlaws Citizens United. Then you can stop all the dark money.
You said everyone should be transparent. So are you saying that No Label should follow?
What is happening is what everybody else is doing. It's just the norm with 501c4 organizations. You're asking me if that's right or good. I say no. I don't think it's right or good. I think there should be transparency and accountability and all things. But that's not the way people play the game. What Joe's talking about, billions of dollars run through the major parties, hidden and dark and all of that. And I've heard this, that we are, a dark money organization. The fact of the matter is the system sucks. It's broken. I mean, you could get a group of good Americans together, all of whom with an IQ over 85, in a room together, and say, does the way we finance campaigns make sense to you? And nobody would agree that how we're doing it today makes sense. So in the true American tradition, we will evolve, and I hope we heal our wounds and we fix this glaring error in how campaigns are run by campaign finance reform.
Well, coming up, we're going to hear more about some of the country's most contentious policy issues, things like guns, the environment, climate change. Is there actually a middle ground? That's coming up right after this break. Welcome back to a special edition of Scripps News Tonight. Right now, the country is dealing with record-setting heat, wildfires, and wildfire smoke. Energy policy is one of the top issues for voters, and Senator Joe Manchin, the swing vote from West Virginia, is one of the Senate's most important voices on the issue. And as attendees of the No Labels Town Hall wanted to know more about where there is potential compromise from the West Virginia senator.
Are taxpayers going to be the ones burdened with this, or do you agree that fossil fuel companies should be responsible for the mess they created and fund cleanup of climate crises or climate disasters?
I'm happy to speak to that because I believe in an all-in energy policy. This country cannot run unless we have an all-in energy policy. And basically 65 to 70% of your energy comes today from fossil. Can we use fossil cleaner? Yes, we have. We've cleaned up the environment more in America in the last 2 decades than anywhere else in the world. Most of all of your pollution right now in the next 10 years will be 90% from Asia. India and China are spending and using more of this without the constraints that we have. Low NOx boilers, scrubbers, baghouses for mercury. But with that, we're investing more in new clean technology, carbonless technology than any place else in the world. With the IRA bill, that's basically going to say we're going to have the fuel that it takes to run our country. We're the superpower of the world. We can't be dependent on foreign supply chains. And we can do that better. We couldn't help our allies. And let me tell you, with the Ukraine war, it showed you what Putin can use for energy. He used energy as a weapon. You can't get caught like that. Now, in a perfect world, you can have whatever you'd want energy-wise if it could do it. We don't have renewables that'll run 24/7. You want electricity 24/7. You want your heat. You want all that. The Mountain Valley Pipeline put 2 billion cubic feet into the marketplace within 6 months. It's been held up forever. Up here, you pay some of the highest prices. Why should you pay 6 times more than those and us down in the southeast, I guess, south Mideast? Why are you paying so much up here? They have no pipelines whatsoever that we can get the gas to you. But yet you were getting propane shipped in from Russia. So we know the problems that's going on here. That shouldn't happen in America. With that, we'll transition. It will happen. We don't have that technology. We don't have that dispatchable power that'll run 24/7 without the fossil that we have. But we're transitioning. And it's an all-in policy right now, and I don't believe that we should leave the country to the point to where we aren't able to take care of ourselves and our military and everything else that we depend on. We are the superpower of the world.
As a father of a 3- and 5-year-old, I'm concerned about the out-of-control federal spending, the interest payments that correspond to that debt, and how it will affect my daughters and future generations. What will the No Labels candidate do to solve this political problem that has with both parties kicking the can down the road, especially with regard to entitlements?
First of all, the balanced budget amendment would do that. John and I both had to live under that. If we, on this trajectory here, it's been estimated that we'll be $170 trillion by 2050. If we don't change $170 by $170 trillion, 2050, just the interest on that will be $5 trillion a year. There will not be a superpower of the United States of America. It's not sustainable. And nobody is talking about that. So every bill that we do should have a cap on it. You cannot exceed that cap. And it should be a pay for. And then basically, how do you protect the necessities? In my state, Social Security and Medicare is the lifeline for so many people. How do you extend that? How do you make it work? How do you make sure that if we do nothing and we sit here and give you just jibber jabber, in 10 years, by 2033, if you're getting $1,000, take $240 off of that. You lose 24%. That's exactly what's going to happen. And every politician says, it was not my fault. It's just automatic. They did it. Well, no, it's been your fault because you never stepped up and did anything. And how can we do it? We have a cap on some of the higher incomes. We have some people who says, oh, well, if you're under 400, you shouldn't pay anything. You know, no more. Well, we have some people on the top of the food chain that probably could get away with not even taking, especially their COLA, let alone anything else. There's so many ways to fix it. But you're not going to fix Social Security and Medicare unless you have more workers paying into it.
Well, one of the principles.
And that's what we're talking about. I'm concerned about my grandchildren and your children because I can assure you, Mike Mullen told me this, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he was Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff, my first Armed Services meeting. I'm trying to learn about all the different concerns of the world. What's our greatest fear? As China, Russia, all that. He got up and gave a statement. He says, listen, the greatest fear the United States faces is the debt of the nation. The debt of the nation will take you down quicker than anything else. My grandfather always said this, Joe, unmanaged debt will lead you to make cowardly decisions. I'll guarantee you. And he was right. And that's exactly what we're doing now. We're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and your children will be left behind if we don't do it and do it now.
Well, coming up after the break, many Americans say they want more choices on their presidential ticket, but it doesn't mean they would actually vote for a third-party candidate. Manchin and Huntsman give their take after this. Welcome back to a special edition of Scripps News Tonight. I'm Andrew Rafferty, Scripps News political director. The town hall hosted by No Labels featuring Democrat Joe Manchin and Republican Jon Huntsman just wrapped. The two men talked about the need for citizens to feel more invested in the country. But how do you do that? More for the No Labels town hall right now.
How do you get back the trust of all Americans into the democratic process?
It is so sad to be in a situation to live in a great country such as this where people are led astray for either social media and so many different ways they're receiving their information and get totally confused. The bottom line is a person who believes the only election, a fair election, is the one they win, it's not real good. The only law pertains to everybody but me. Not real good. The rule of law is what makes us different. It makes us different than any place in the world. And when you see Madam Justice and she's blindfolded for a reason. She don't know what color you are. She don't know how much money you have, where you come from. but you all have equal access to the law, unfeathered. And it's just something that just gets me that when I said, I was there January 6th. January 6th happened. That was an insurrection. It wasn't a visit. If it was a visit, I've been talking to all of them. It was really an insurrection, okay? And basically, I spoke to the people in Georgia, the officials in Georgia, Republican officials, the governor, Secretary of State, and the Attorney General. And those elections were accurate. They counted them 3 times. He said, we never count elections this much. So, you have to believe the facts and accept them. And the one thing about, in the political process, when the race is over and the people have spoken, you move on. That's democracy, the orderly transfer of power. And that's what the whole world is watching us. And if they see they can divide us, and John really speak, when they can divide us, then they've conquered. They don't need to fight us. They don't want to take us to war. They don't want to fight us. If they can see us fighting ourselves, they've won.
Are they leveraging that? Are other adversaries leveraging the division via social media platforms, for example, Governor, in the United States to drive that division, not just amongst political parties, but amongst race, amongst sexual orientation? Are they trying to instill hate into the democracy?
So the name Yevgeny Prigozhin is well known to everybody now. The person who ran another insurrection in Russia. So Yevgeny Prigozhin was Putin's chef. He ran a restaurant in St. Petersburg, and later was given the military food contract, which made him a billionaire. But what a lot of people don't know is that Yevgeny Prigozhin, in the neighborhood of St. Petersburg, where he is from, also ran some of the darker operations that Putin sent him to do. So the black box operations that Prigozhin has been famous for, including the troll farm outside St. Petersburg. So when we read Facebook and Twitter, a lot of social media, and we see these the extreme commentary on both sides seeking to divide we as Americans around race, around gender, around anything else that can be exploited, after school shootings, after unfortunate incidents. Well, guess who's at it? Yeah, the Russians. Yeah. They're pretty good at it, and they've been doing it for a long time. And I wish more Americans were aware of that, realizing that the damage we think we're doing to one another, that it's a fellow American behind it. Not always.
And coming up, we're going to break down what we heard during this town hall, what was said, and almost as important, what was not. That's coming up after the break.
Welcome back, folks. You're watching Scripps News Tonight's special coverage of the No Labels Town Hall in New Hampshire with Democratic Senator Joe Manchin in West Virginia and former Utah Governor Republican Jon Huntsman. I'm Christian Bryan in Washington. In moments, we'll be joined by Scripps News' Kevin Cirilli, who moderated this event, for live analysis. Right now, though, let's take a look at some of the other top stories we're following this hour. On the eve of a visit from Israeli President Isaac Herzog, the White House is looking to ease tensions with another prominent Israeli leader. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office confirmed that President Biden invited him to visit the U.S. in a phone call described as, quote, warm. The invitation follows months of strained rhetoric between these leaders, with President Biden describing Netanyahu's political coalition in recent weeks as, quote, one of the most extremist in decades. Israeli President Herzog, meanwhile, will meet with President Biden at the White House on Tuesday and address a joint session of Congress on Wednesday. A key hearing in the federal criminal case against former President Trump is set for tomorrow in Fort Pierce, Florida. U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon, who was appointed to her post by former President Trump, will hear arguments on the handling of the highly classified documents at the center of this case. Trump faces 37 felony charges related to those documents, ranging from willful retention of classified records to obstruction of justice. His legal team has asked Judge Cannon to postpone the trial tentatively set for August until possibly after the 2024 presidential election. Let's circle back to our big story tonight. The No Labels Town Hall held in New Hampshire just a short while ago. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and Republican and former Utah Governor Jon Huntsman both took the stage in Manchester, calling for a return to common sense leadership in Washington and an end to political extremes.
We need options, and the options may be moving the parties who basically have receded to their, I will call extreme right and extreme left. And that's not who we are. It's not where we've come from. It's not the country that we are. And we're basically saying common sense.
Here with us tonight are Scripps News political director Andrew Rafferty and national political correspondent Kevin Cirilli, who moderated the town hall. Andrew, I want to start with you. I want to play you a bit of what Senator Joe Manchin said when asked if tonight's event was a precursor for a White House run. Take a listen.
You've said you're going to decide by the end of the year. Would you consider him as a potential running mate?
John is my dear friend.
Better answer.
Okay? I think people are getting ahead of putting the cart ahead of the horse. We're here to make sure that the American people have an option. And the option is, can you move the political parties off their respective sides?
Kevin stayed on this question a good bit. What do you make of that? Is Senator Manchin playing coy here?
Well, certainly, and I think a lot of us watching appreciated that Kevin was able to kind of push Joe Manchin on this question, because the reality is, if you are a senator from West Virginia and you are in New Hampshire a year before, 6 months about before the potential primary here, and of course, well over a year ahead of an election season, that's a question that is fair and that honestly deserves an answer. And the fact that Joe Manchin is saying, well, no, I'm just here to make sure that we have these common sense solutions does seem a little bit odd. But the reality is that this is a movement that is tapping into frustration that we've seen from a lot of people, not only that we've talked to as reporters, but certainly is represented in the polling as well. The number that they give, no labels, say about 70% of respondents aren't happy about a Joe Biden re-election. 60% feel the same about a potential Donald Trump nomination. And so they are certainly trying to tap into that. What that translates to politically, I think, is still a really big question.
Over to Scripps News political correspondent Kevin Cirilli now, who moderated tonight's event. Kevin, I found this exchange you had with Senator Manchin pretty interesting. Let me play it for you real quick.
If you do get in the race and you spoil the election, would that factor into?
I've never been in any race I've ever spoiled. I've been in races to win. And if I get in a race, I'm going to win.
Not there to spoil. He said if he jumps in, he's there to win. That's a pretty strong response for a man who hasn't said he's running for president, right?
Well, yes. In the Senate, Senator Joe Manchin is perhaps the most notable, consequential centrist right now in the Senate. And he's been frequently asked if he's an independent and why he doesn't pull a Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona and switch his party affiliation from Democrat to independent. But separately from that, outside of that room, there are other centrists. And what this really is about is for the moderate middle. There were 44,000 votes in 2020 that were tipped to President Biden away from former President Trump in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. And what No Labels is saying is that if a candidacy in 2024 wants those swing votes, they're going to have to back this. And what this is and represents, this common sense proposal, as they're calling it, is what they hope will be the moderates' version of a Green New Deal and eventually get into legislation that will end up on any president's desk.
Yeah, what Manchin said a bit earlier, I'm the most independent Democrat there is. Andrew, frankly speaking, this No Labels brand of politicking could result in absolutely nothing. But the very real possibility of Biden v. Trump round 2 has more Americans than ever looking for a third option. In fact, according to a new poll from News Nation and DDHQ, just over 49% of voters say it is somewhat or very likely they'd consider a third-party candidate if the 2024 ticket turns into a Trump and Biden rematch. So, is No Labels striking while the iron's hot here?
Yeah, well, look, I think that you got to kind of dig into some of those numbers. The reality is that, yes, I mean, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, neither of them are particularly popular, even though you go back to the 2020 election, Joe Biden won with a message that was much geared towards centrists. You know, Gallup's numbers have about 4 in 10 Americans identifying as independents, and it's been kind of steadily climbing. But when you dig in, a lot of those so-called independents do have pretty strong partisan leanings. Either they consider themselves independent but are more Republican or more Democrat. And this idea that independents are some unified political group, I think, is a bit of a misnomer as well. The idea there are independents who want universal health care. There are independents who want the United States to return to a confederacy. And so the idea that, okay, there's this growing group of Americans who want something other than Trump or Biden, that they would somehow rally around Joe Manchin and Jon Huntsman or some other hypothetical ticket, I think is a really interesting question we're going to have to continue to watch.
Yeah, not exactly a monolith there. Kevin, 7% of the people polled for that third-party candidate survey said they would back Senator Joe Manchin. Specifically, what's the angle for former Governor Huntsman then? He's denied having any plans for a White House run, and he was equally evasive during the conversation a bit earlier.
Well, Huntsman was one of the original founders and one of the original folks in a part of No Labels. But to go back to what Andrew Rafferty just said, which is important in terms of what No Labels officials have been saying privately for months and now publicly, essentially in the last couple of days. They don't necessarily want to run a ticket. And Senator Manchin said that to me on stage earlier. Huntsman said that to me earlier on stage. But the top officials are saying that as well. They don't necessarily want to run a ticket. What they want to see is that the Republican nominee and or President Biden come out and say that there is a moderate approach, a policy approach that they're willing to get behind. They feel that the fringes, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes of the world have too much political power in the current political discourse. Christian?
Yeah, exactly as you said. They're looking to influence the discourse and push it a certain way. National political correspondent Kevin Cirilli, who moderated tonight's event, many thanks. Now let's bring America's two main parties into the conversation. We have Democratic strategist Isaac Wright and Republican strategist Rena Shaw with us tonight. Thank you both for joining us. Rena, let's start with you. You're in the never Trump camp, yet the criticism of No Labels from the left is that this approach could clear a path for another Trump administration. Where do you fall on the No Labels messaging here?
I was a very young staffer on Capitol Hill when I saw No Labels come into existence. And they came out with a lot of bombast. They had people like Jon Huntsman and numerous others elected officials who were either sitting in current posts or had been in former elected roles. And these were people that came out saying, we need to do better for America. Again, this was 2010. And here we sit in 2023. And what I hear from No Labels is no different. Their messaging hasn't changed over the years. What has changed, however, is their coffers. They are flush with millions and millions of dollars, and one could refer to them as a group that is funded with a lot of dark money, with money that comes from the Harlan Crows of the world. Harlan Crow's a name that became rather famous into the American public consciousness just in the past few months because of his ties to the U.S. Supreme Court and conservative justices. So when I talk about the influence of money and the fact that No Labels continues to stay relevant, despite not putting out anything but milquetoast examples of what they want to change in American politics and governing, I say to you, this is a moment in time where we have to pay attention and pay attention to people that are not putting democracy under siege, but they are asking us to look the other way as there are existential threats to democracy that sit within the Republican Party, the party that I made my career in. But I'm very concerned about the impact of how it moves forward and really continues to be a healthy party in this democracy.
Yeah, and the funding from No Labels has been a big question here. Isaac, I want to turn to you. No Labels has gotten a ton of criticism from the left. Their aim is to, quote, identify where our next president should apply some common sense leadership to improve Americans' quality of life and make our nation safer, stronger, and more prosperous, and maybe put a third ticket nominee up if necessary. If they're looking for common sense solutions, what's the issue with their approach from your perspective?
Well, I think we're waiting to see their approach, right? You saw that policy statement come out today, and it was just like the word you just quoted from. Common sense solutions, things that people can agree on that are prosperous and move us forward. I'm yet to find the politician who would argue against those things. But the problem is the proof needs to be in the pudding. You look, for example, where the no labels policy position on choice. They want to come up with a compromise that makes most Americans happy. Well, that's not really a policy, right? Since when did we need to compromise a woman's autonomy over her own body to reach everybody to be happy? This is where no labels has fallen short. And I totally agree with what was said about the dark money aspect being a major problem here.
Andrew, I want to play a quick exchange we saw tonight at the town hall between Kevin Cirilli and Senator Joe Manchin. Take a listen here.
What is your response to the critics who say this sounds like a great idea, but in practicality, it can't be executed?
Let me just, on the e pluribus unum, in West Virginia, we have Montani semper liberi. Mountaineers are always free. So you put out of many one and free on both of those and put them together. That's who we are. That's exactly what we want. We want this freedom that comes from us working together.
Here's what I took away from that. Lots of talk of great ideas and very little talk about real solutions. This is something both of our guests have mentioned. What did you make of that exchange, Kevin?
Yeah, well, Christian, I think, number one, it is important to note that Joe Manchin still has also considering running for re-election in West Virginia, which, of course, he had the name drop there. And so that's also something that he is dealing with. But I do think talking about the specific policy issues in that memorandum, the platform essentially that came out ahead of this town hall, some of those hot button issues, abortion, they basically punted on, saying essentially that we should try to find some compromise between the extremes. A lot of it doesn't necessarily translate to governing, and if it did, I think the country would probably be in a little bit better better spot on some of these hot button issues, Christian.
Yeah, that's political director Andrew Rafferty. When you have a lot of boxes here, you can get people mixed up a little bit. Rena, I want to come to you. CNN SSRS polling showed that a historic number of Americans don't want to see 2020 Part 2 with a Biden-Trump rematch when they head to the polls. What does this tell you about your party and the dissatisfaction among American voters with the candidates leading the polling?
Well, there's no polling needed to tell us exactly why people would be frustrated with the Biden and Trump rematch. It's been said many times over that this will be the most consequential election of our time coming up. But I truly believe in 2024, it will be the most consequential presidential election we've had since the Civil War, because a Biden and Trump rematch would mean that we are taking one or the other octogenarian to the White House and trusting them to do out a full turn, to perform for us, to speak to the issues that really Gen Z is facing, millennials like me are facing. It was Gen Z that delivered the White House for Joe Biden, truly. And when we talk about high levels of dissatisfaction with both parties, I think what we ought to look at is beyond the age. We got to look at the fact that nowadays what we have are people not really able to talk about the kitchen table issues in the way they could just 6 years ago. We have a real disconnect with what is happening on the ground in the states, what state houses across the country are doing to American women. Now, look, whether you're anti-abortion or saying that you are pro-choice, one thing is true. The government is coming into our lives at a faster rate than any of us thought was possible, whether we're talking student loan forgiveness, or we're talking about our crime and public safety issues. We've got younger families not able to buy homes anymore. What are we doing to the American consciousness, and why aren't presidential candidates speaking to us in this way? Particularly on the GOP side, we're seeing them lean into the culture wars. We're seeing them not pay attention to the polls, and the fact that most Americans truly want to break with Trump. The midterm elections were a referendum on Republicans. And look, they don't have the White House right now. They don't have both chambers. They have the House. And what I see here is a real problem moving forward of how term limits are not enacted in a way. We have the influence of big money in politics. And then we've got people like Joe Manchin from my native home state of West Virginia out there thinking about his legacy. Make no mistake, he was in New Hampshire today as a
Rena, I'm sorry, I've got to break in here. Rena, forgive me, I've got to break in here. We're running out of time. Republican strategist Rena Shaw, we appreciate you. Democratic strategist Isaac Wright, thanks for joining us with your thoughts tonight. And Scripps News political director Andrew Rafferty will hang out with us for a little bit for more analysis. And we'll have more on the ground analysis with our congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed. That's coming up next. Welcome back to Scripps News Tonight, and thank you for being with us. The countdown is on until the 2024 election, and there's a chance the electoral map isn't just red and blue. There's serious talk of a third-party ticket. Scripps News congressional correspondent is with us now from Manchester, New Hampshire. That's where our colleague Kevin Cirilli moderated a No Labels town hall earlier today. No Labels is a political organization that says it opposes extremes from both parties. He spoke with Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and former Republican governor from Utah, Jon Huntsman. Nate, you've been talking with voters there. What do you make of all this?
Well, look, I want to start with the numbers, then I'll give you the sound with the voters to prove it. But we spoke with voters all this afternoon in Manchester, getting outside the folks who showed up at that St. Anselm town hall. Some of those folks who showed up were affiliated with All Labels. But I just want to show you the numbers here in New Hampshire about voters who are dissatisfied with former President Trump and current President Biden. In this recent New Hampshire Institute of Politics poll taken in the month of June, the question was, is a 2024 Joe Biden versus Donald Trump matchup the best for both parties, or does it mean the system is broken? Look at those numbers. 7%, just 7% of New Hampshire registered voters, among 1,000 of them, said that it was the best matchup possible. 83%, a whopping 83%, said that that means something in the system is broken. And that was largely echoed by folks that we talked to right here in downtown Manchester. Have a listen. Do you wish in 2024 that there was a candidate who wasn't Trump or Biden who is running?
Of course. So I think there's a huge divide going on. Everyone wants to be something that they're not, and we're all so much more united than our government of the United States is acting as though we are.
But then if you talk to voters about Senator Joe Manchin, first of all, I noticed that a number of them, first of all, don't know who he is unless you're super plugged into politics. But even the voters who I did talk about, those who were looking for a third way, some of them weren't big fans of Joe Manchin, saying that he is making the problems in Washington greater rather than reducing them by being more nonpartisan. Have a listen.
Joe Manchin, he doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell. I think we've got two of the most unpopular candidates in political history. I think we got a working class who is more disengaged than ever because we're worked so hard to the bone, and we don't even have the time to check the news. So I don't think he's going to get much play. But I have no good things to say about Mr. Manchin.
And remember, Joe Manchin right now is probably the most conservative Democrat in Washington, and certainly that was one of the things that the voter who we just spoke to there was reacting to. It's worth noting, though, that Senator Manchin hasn't really made clear whether he's going to keep the D Democrat next to his name forever. I asked him after the event today at St. Anselm whether he would consider becoming an independent following Senator Kyrsten Sinema's lead, who did the same thing earlier this year. Take a listen.
Will you follow Senator Sinema and become an independent?
We'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. That really leaves the doors open. We still do not know whether he is going to run for re-election to the U.S. Senate. He noted he has until January 15th in the state of West Virginia to make his decision on re-election. But folks here, not exactly clear that Joe Manchin is the candidate that they're seeking. A lot of discontent, though, with the options that are on the table.
Congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed, thanks for the insight from the town hall. We'll have our final takeaways from the No Labels town hall after this. Stay with us. Welcome back, folks, and thanks for joining us. We appreciate you being here for the follow-up from the No Labels town hall, where we heard a lot of discussion about ideas for bipartisanship and unity. Not heavy on solutions, but again, this is something that we're continuing to follow. The big part of this is that a lot of American voters do not want to see a Biden-Trump rematch. Folks, we appreciate you joining us. I'm Christian Bryan in Washington. Have a good night.